We're now going to move on to recommended draft policy 2015-3, removing the 30-day utilization requirement in end-user IPv4 policy. So, I'll do the introduction of this. This is a recommended draft policy. Something important to know. This policy, if recommended by you, and if then well considered by the AC as a result, could go to the Board of Trustees after this meeting to be adopted. So this policy is a potential change. It's reached a stage of advancement in the policy process that we may be making a change if it's favorably considered. Hence, we're somewhat rigorous in how we do this part. I therefore will do the policy introduction. This was introduced as ARIN Policy Proposal 217 in May 2015. The AC shepherds, the two members of the AC responsible for guiding it through the process, David Farmer and Leif Sawyer. It was presented at ARIN Public Policy Consultation at NANOG 64 in June of 2015, and it was presented at the ARIN 36 meeting in October 2015. It was advanced by the AC to recommended draft policy state in March of 2016, which meant the AC felt it met the criteria for suitable change to ARIN policy. The text is online and in the discussion guide. Staff understanding. This proposal would remove the 25% utilization requirement, which is a requirement that says you have to use 25% of the address block that we issue to you within 30 days of its issuance, as a criteria bullet point currently in the NRPM, the Number Resource Policy Manual, in section 433. Your discussion guide has a copy of the full Number Resource Policy Manual, so you can go look at NRPM section 433 and see where we're removing that. Staff comments. The policy would closely align with the way staff applies the existing policy to 8.3 transfers. Because there's no longer an IPv4 free pool and many IPv4 requests are likely to be satisfied by 8.3 transfers, the adoption of policy should have no major impact on operations, could be implemented as written. There's no material legal risk in the policy, is the legal assessment from council. The resource impact. If adopted, this policy would have minimal resource impact from an implementation aspect. It's estimated that it could occur shortly after ratification by the Board of Trustees. We would need to update some internal guidelines and internal procedures, and we'd have to update our staff training materials. So I'll now turn it over to David Farmer of the ARIN Advisory Council, who will give the Advisory Council report on this policy.
Okay. Same information. We're still talking about removing the 30-day utilization requirement for end users. And this is the problem statement for the policy. The requirements, we're handing out a year's worth of address space, basically, and as was said, there's currently a 25% requirement of immediate utilization. Immediate's being interpreted as 30 days by staff for a long time. This removes an unrealistic expectation, etc. So this is the current text, and basically we're going to zap that line. Well, when we do this, we need to do some additional editorial things here because what's left kind of doesn't make sense all by itself. So we do some minor editorial changes here and take the last sentence fragment and this and bind it all together and make a new paragraph. And so it often takes longer than 30 days to stage and start equipment and actually use the addresses. So if you're starting from zero, it's kind of hard to do sometimes. Growth is not, regimented in this way. It happens in spurts. This doesn't really account for that. It also applies to additional requests or transfers of new space. And in that case, you're supposed to be 80% utilized. And so there's some disconnect here in the way these work. And as was noted, so another change that's happening is with runout. Part of this was also with the slow start policy and various other things where an end user, the intent was the end user would get space from their ISP, get started, then once they get to a certain size, then they come to ARIN. Well, there's no ARIN free pool. ISPs can't get space very easily. Users are, the whole system doesn't work any longer. So these requirements are onerous now in current conditions. So there's been a good amount of discussion of this on PPML. As was noted, it was presented at the PPC and NANOG 36 in Montreal. There's agreement, there's a definite issue here. There's strong support. There's a small amount of opposition in this, and I'll explain that right here. So the opposition seems to be that this removes the only tangible and verifiable claim. Basically, all that's left is this forward-looking projection for a year. The commenter would like there to be some sort of tangible and verifiable commitment to using half the address space within a year. Staff assessment, as was discussed. Continued. So one of the things the staff assessment includes is a notation that RFC 2050 is referenced, and that's no longer, that's now a historic document, and that a similar, there's a similar policy artifact in 4236. This was brought up in Montreal, and the feedback from Montreal was keep this policy narrowly focused on 433 and do other work to clean those other things up. So that's where we're at right now. Question to you all for the discussion is this ready for last call? How can we and should we address the opposition? And if we do something to address the opposition, should we clean up those other things?
Thank you. Okay, so we opened the microphones, but if you're new, just since this is our first recommended draft policy, there's a very excellent flow chart I'd ask you to all look at page 20 of the book. And you'll notice this policy is already at step 7. So this is the last time this policy may be discussed at a meeting like this. So if you have a concern, now is an excellent time to raise it. If you would like to give it a push of support, that's also very important. But I just want to say, as opposed to the last policy, which is still kind of in that 3-4 and could loop around a few times, this policy, if the poll question we'll have at the end has strong support, could be the next step into it moving on to the last call. So just a little for the people who are, this might be their first time, and those that have been around for a while. And I tried to register that out, hoping that there would be a queue of people at the microphones, but. Well, first we'll go to the front microphone.
Alyssa Moore with Cybera, and also a fellow, so this is my first meeting. I noticed that the opposition says that 25% clause is the only verifiable element of the policy. I'm just wondering how often, or if at all, these things are checked up upon and verified.
Okay, I'm going to ask John Kern of staff. Oh, wait, you unfortunately don't get to run away that easily. Yeah, I know. John Kern to address?
So it's actually something we do check up on, meaning that the requirement says you'll use 25% within 30 days. We have been known to call organizations, particularly ones with particularly aggressive blocks, and ask them about their utilization information because we are required to check up on such. Note that now that people are transferring blocks, because we don't have a free pool, and they can transfer up to 2 years, the 25% utilization comes at a much higher threshold because the block is larger. So that's a lot of work in 30 days. It makes sense to allow a large block because, in 2 years' worth, because going through a transfer is more work than just getting an assignment. But the impact on the lower end is we have potential of calling someone and saying, show us your 30-day utilization. And for someone who's gotten a large block within their allocation, it can be very difficult to show it got operationally used. So we do check. We're more likely to find someone who has a problem now because they're doing a transfer of a larger block than what we would have assigned out of the free pool. Does that help?
Did that answer your question? Before you run now with that data, would you support the policy?
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin Bloomberg, I believe, was next in queue. And I would encourage, of course, to use this time to approach a microphone because we do need some discussion. So,
Yeah. So Kevin Bloomberg, the Wire RNAC, and it's sort of actually ties directly into what John said. I'd really like to understand from staff how the 25 and 50% right now that's in here applies when we're now talking about transfers, which are 24 months. It's a very different metric, so if you could sort of explain, because the 25 and 50% based on 30 in 1 year is based on free pool, where 8.3, 8.4 is 24 month.
thank you. Other comments, maybe remote? Did you? Again, it's important even just to approach a microphone, say your name, and either I support or I do not support. It's good feedback to the room. Front of microphone.
Owen DeLong, Akamai, RNAC, member of the community. I generally support the proposal. I'd like to see the opposition's issue get addressed if possible, but not to the point of delaying this because I think it's needed. So it probably won't get addressed, but maybe we can do something about that in the future. Definitely the RFC 2050 references in 4236 is a separate issue, and let's just clean that up later.
Thank you. Comment on stage?
I just wanted to clarify, Kevin's point wasn't a point, it was a question. So I didn't know if John wanted to actually respond to that.
Could you repeat the question, Kevin? Because I think a bunch of us missed it. Our apology.
I missed the question part of that.
No worries. The question was to clarify for everybody. When it comes, this policy is in reference to free pool space.
Right.
When you take into account that almost every request will now be based on transfer via 8.3 or 8.4, which has a 24-month, can you explain how staff calculates with this in transfers versus what when somebody is just reading and it's saying 25% over 30 days? How does that now work with a 24-month transfer?
It still requires them to use 25% of the block being transferred. Okay? Now, this is the unfortunate circumstance of having transfer policies which chain to needs assessment, which come from allocation and assignment policies in elsewhere in the NERPM. When the AC has some free time, if it would like to unwind those, that would be greatly appreciated.
Hint, hint. That was, subtle message, John. Thanks. Other comments or questions? People just still recovering from lunch a bit, I think. Rear microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google ASOAC. Can you go back to the opposition slide? Oh, and I should say I support the concept. I strongly support removing the 30-day need. I'm not sure I support it as written. I wish people would stop referring to this as the opposition, because the person who wrote this is actually in support of this policy. However, the concern is the 30-day check is the only teeth that this policy has. And without any teeth at all, this could become an avenue for abuse. It could basically allow anyone to make any sort of 2-year projection claim and transfer something and basically use it as an end run around needs-based justification. And that is really my concern with the policy as written. Back in January, I suggested some alternate language. that basically that there should be some tangible and verifiable claim to show that they're going to use 50% of the address space within 1 year. I didn't see a lot of objection to that on the mailing list. So I'd like to ask the room here if people object to adding some sort of requirement for tangible and a verifiable claim of the plan to use the address space within 1 year. I also gave 3 kind of approaches. It could either be very vague, it could be open-ended with some examples of things that would be accepted, or we could have some specific list of criterion. So I'd like to hear responses to that.
Jason, don't run away quite yet, okay?
I'll agree there wasn't a lot of objection, there wasn't a lot of support either. It was a toss-up as the shepherd that I sort of took. And I apologize if that's not what the community wants, but sometimes it's hard to read the community. The other thing, I apologize for the opposition. I just couldn't find a better word that fits on slides and things like that. If you got better words for that, let me know.
I just think the important point here is I have concerns about abuse, and I'd like to close that loophole. So it's not that I oppose the policy.
So you don't oppose the policy as written, or?
I do not support the policy as written because I'm concerned that there are loopholes for abuse.
Okay.
I don't want to see this become an end run around justified need for end users.
Thank you. Very, very good comment. Front microphone, please.
Hi. Chris Woodfield, Twitter. I came up to ask a question that Jason just answered in his statement, which was, had there been any consideration of extending the verification term versus removing it entirely? I would support a policy that
Keep going.
I'm sorry. I would support a policy that extended that the deadline to show utilization. I would not support a policy that eliminated the need for that check entirely.
Okay. Thank you. Head table of int.
VidSurf, Google, and Chairman of the Board. I thought, in response to that last remark, that there's still an element in there saying 50% within a year. So is that not tested ever? That's a question for John.
John?
So we can go back on the present policy and confirm that someone has done the utilization that they claim they do, but it's much more difficult to know whether or not someone has made a fraudulent request if we don't check shortly after we've assigned to them. In other words, someone will find address space utilization within a year one way or the other, but whether or not they were valid for what we assigned is much easier to determine if they made use of it in the first 30 days, or 30 days, 60 days, the immediate future. A year from now, companies go through major changes, and so I'm not saying that it's not something we can confirm. We can ask them, but it doesn't validate whether their original request was the right size.
I was going to say, does that answer your question? You have a look of perplexity, though.
Well, it is a response to the question. We'll put it that way.
Okay, before we go to the front microphone, we're going to be closing the microphones very shortly, so please approach quickly or start typing in the remote participation if you have a comment. But we're going to be closing. What do you?
Why are we closing the microphones? Why are we giving 5 and 10 and 15 minutes for these? If we have things to talk about, can we please talk about them?
If the microphones start to line up, I am happy to keep talking. But at some point, I need to encourage people to either come say something or we have to move on. But I have no problem if there is stuff to say. Front microphone.
All right, David Huberman from Oracle. So let's talk about what Jason and Chris's concept looks like. We aren't assigning IP addresses out of a free pool here. We're talking about IPv4. We're talking about things people have gone and bought on a market. That's what it looks like. So if I want to go out and buy a /X based on my 24-month forecasts, as policy allows now, no matter what happens after I purchase that, there's nothing ARIN can do, okay? You can't say that just, well, you got to talk about what happens in a year. Vint asked, well, what happens if you go back? It doesn't matter what happens because there's nothing ARIN can do. I can't unbuy the block, and ARIN cannot coerce me in any way to sell the block, to divest the block, okay? block has been purchased. And what I do with it now hopefully aligns with the capital that I've spent to purchase it. I understand that if this were a free pool discussion, that Jason's fraud concerns I would completely agree with, and I wouldn't propose this. I am the policy author, by the way. But you go out and buy what you need. And sometimes you're going to go out and buy what you need in the future, 24 months or not. And whatever ARIN says, and whatever WHOIS says, isn't going to change that I went out and bought it, and I control the IP addresses. So we have an entire 8.3, we have an entire very, very relevant transfer section that's based on a 24-month need. What happens in the first 30 days, or even what happens in the first year, I don't know that any more checks and balances is going to change the operational reality of those IP addresses being on equipment, being used for whatever.
Okay, one moment, please. Recognize John Curran.
So I'm gonna, I don't have any opinion on what you said one way or the other, but I need to work on terminology a little. So what you call an IP address block and what I call an IP address block, what ARIN uses as a definition of IP address block might be a little different. So an IP address block in the Internet Numbers Registry system is an entry in the registry, and the person who controls it is the address holder in the registry. Now, I don't deny that parties can lock up those rights or lease them. ISPs transfer addresses to their customers temporarily or permanently. You can do that. But the ISP, if it's in the address block, as the holder of record, has the rights and can enforce those in court. So I just, for sake of not confusing people, okay, you want to say that no matter what ARIN does, you're the one who's borrowing or leasing the address space, you can say that. But actually, the party you bought them from can enter a transaction with ARIN, and so that will change who has the rights. And so it's only your contract with them that prevents them from doing it. I just want to be really clear that the transfer actually doesn't complete until you actually have the ability to tell ARIN what's in the registry. Until then, you're borrowing them or leasing them. So, terminology. Having noted such, just for clarity, if someone shows up with a transfer, and we look and we approve the transfer, and then we go out and we say, I'm sorry, you haven't been using the address block, there's a very rapid discussion with that company about how to get those addresses utilized. I don't know if that's what the community wants or doesn't want, but it's what your policy says we have to do, is we have to have a discussion with them saying, you indicated you were going to utilize them, you're not, and you need to come into compliance quickly. So there is a jeopardy situation. How that plays out, we don't know, because people very promptly figure out how to get those addresses utilized.
Are you in favor or against, or did you not want to state an opinion at this time of the proposal?
Oh, I'm in favor of the proposal. I think it makes good sense in an 8.3 world where there's no free for all. 30-day utilization is not realistic.
Understood. Thank you very much. Front microphone is next.
Scott Librand, Deliver ARIN AC. I support the proposal. I think that in the context of 8.3 transfers, in the context of 24-month needs, that using 1/24 of the addresses in 30 days would be appropriate. Using 1/4 of the addresses in 30 days is an extremely front-loaded obligation. And to John's point about people very quickly figuring out how to use the addresses when ARIN follows up with them, I really doubt that corresponds to actual need to use those addresses in an economic or customer sense. It's putting them on equipment because ARIN says you have to. That's kind of silly and pointless. I think this requirement is kind of silly and pointless in the context of 8.3 transfers, and I think we would be best off just going ahead with the proposal as written. I understand Jason's concern about end run around needs justification, but I believe that the fact that people have to put down real hard cash to get addresses is a sufficient disincentive from them doing anything that would bypass this policy in any meaningful sense. So I don't think that concern is something that we need to have us hold up from moving this forward. If we wanted to have other discussions around ways to deal with justified need in a 8.3 transfer world. I think that's a very valid discussion to have, but I don't think it should derail this policy, so I support it as written.
Thank you. Microphones are going to be closed at the end of this next intervener's comment, so I would ask that you please approach a microphone if you would like to make a comment or more participation. Rear microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google ASOAC. I just wanted some clarity. Would this policy be applied to end users who are on the waiting list or wanted to get on the waiting list? And if so, can staff
There's
tell me
nodding.
the last time an end user was added, was it attempted to be added to the wait list?
Yeah, so this would apply to someone who's on the waiting list. If resources come back in, for example, someone returns them, or IANA gives us another allocation, we will issue people address space based on this. But I guess the point to recognize is the last time we received a large amount of space from the IANA, we're getting diminishing dribbles now based on the returned IPv4 pool. The last time we satisfied 6 people out of a waiting list of 300. So while it is applicable, it's applicable to a very, very, very small number of people in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. The microphones are now closed, and we will go to our last comment from Kevin Bloomberg, unless there is an online. Nope. Okay.
Kevin Bloomberg. What happens, John, when an organization gets a space through a transfer and doesn't reach 25%? What in the RSA is ARIN's recourse?
ARIN's recourse provides that if you don't comply with policy, then we can reclaim the address space.
So we have a situation now where in the free pool no transactional things occurred, financial, to external ARIN parties. ARIN gave the space. You didn't follow the policy. ARIN took the space back. Now we've got this complexity of party X now works with party Y to do a financial transaction. ARIN's in the middle of it, but then ARIN can go after the fact and yank it because of a policy that was designed for free pool, just to...
So just as parties have been very wise not to try to force a non-compliant transfer on ARIN, I'm very prudent when I say ARIN can reclaim the address block. When I call up someone and say, we need to get you into compliance, there's usually great compliance. We have not yet had to have a circumstance where we remove a block that someone's transferred and that they have paid their money for, and we've taken it for the use of the community because of non-compliance. Generally, people are very rational when that discussion comes up.
Thank you. So based on that, I support the policy, and I support it because this simplifies and prevents the headbutting in the transfer market that can cause conflict that's not needed.
Thank you. And with that, the discussion is closed. Let's thank David Farm for the presentation and the work. I'm going to now ask our crack polling team to get into position here. Question's slightly different because, again, this is in a slightly different phase. I'll be asking for those in favor and against the advisory council advancing this proposal to the next stage at this time. So first I'll ask for those in favor and those against. So I'll just first wait for the go signal. And just as a reminder, if you can hear the sound of my voice, you are entitled to put up your hand for either yes or no, should you so choose. So first, all those on the matter of ARIN 2015-3, remove 30-day utilization requirement in the end user policy and having the advisory council advance it at this time, please raise your hand for in favor. Please keep the hands up. Remember which hand you put up this time. You can use the other one next time. Try and balance out the workout. Just a little bit longer, I realize. And you may lower them. Thank you. Now all those opposed, please raise your hand nice and high. Oh, there we go. Nice and high. Thank you. You may lower it. So just one moment while we get the results. Any public service messages, John, today?
I think there's one coming in an afternoon slide, but for those people who may have had challenges getting to and from here, we're juicing up the shuttle schedules.
Oh, yes.
There shall be more schedules, more shuttles
shuttles.
running more frequently, and that will help us get to other points in this very beautiful resort.
Excellent. I see our polling coordinator here walking down with the envelope. I know you're all on the edge of your seat wondering what the result was. Thank you, sir. On the matter of 2015-3, still in the room. Oh, no, I think we went up. No, we changed a bit. 113 in the room, 4 remote, 117 total, 42 in favor, 3 against. This feedback is being provided to the Advisory Council for their feedback. Thank you.